who's running the Pandemic Recovery Office. I want to welcome all three of you to the committee today. And also I just want to say thank you for your work really over almost the last year now as we've been going through this pandemic. I know it's been a period of consistent change, a lot of long hours, long weekends, and other things. So I want to start by thanking you for all your work and thank you for preparing these materials for the committee today. So with that, there is a presentation the administration has prepared to walk us through. And so Director Smiley, I'll turn it over to you to perhaps start off and let you lead from the administration side.
Great, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for having us, and congratulations on your chairmanship. We look forward to working with you. The administration would also like to congratulate and welcome Senator Acosta. We look forward to working with you throughout the budget season and beyond, and welcome Attorney Ford for the vital role that you play in keeping the committee functioning well. Director Leach is not able to join us today, so Jonathan Wilmer and I will be handling today's presentation. The overview of the presentation will include updated budget spending, our projections and budgets for the remainder of the pandemic as best as we know, and then a summary of the most recent federal aid package, the one that was passed back in December. As long-standing members of the committee know, because we've met several times, we have spent a long time caring for, preserving, optimizing the original stimulus package, which was referred to as the CARES Act. And for folks who might be watching at home, just to keep our terms straight here, the package that passed back in the late spring was called the CARES Act. A subset of that is referred to as the Corona Relief Fund, or CRF. That's commonly mentioned as a $1.25 billion relatively flexible source of funds. There are other sources of funds in the CARES Act that are in many cases dedicated or less flexible. And so we'll try to do our best to distinguish between CARES Act funding, CRF funding, and now this most recent tranche of funding that has. Important to note that the money that came out in December, while passed and signed by President Trump, in many cases, the rules have not yet been written on those funds. And so we are going to give an overview to the committee so that you can plan appropriately and see what those resources are. But there are still some question marks and some gray areas that won't be resolved until rulemaking is completed. And I can say, thankfully, now under the Biden administration. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Wilmer, who will drive, and then he and I will both be available for questions throughout or after the fact on any topic that's of interest to the committee. Jonathan?
Thank you, Director Smiley. I'm going to see if I can make sure I share the right screen here. Can everybody see that okay?
We can.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Good to be here again and for this really important topic. This is a lot of slides. We have over 40 slides here, so I'm not going to try to read every one of them. As I go through, if you've got questions, Chairman, certainly interrupt me, and certainly we'll stay as long as you want to answer questions at the end. You'll see sort of in the middle of the presentation, I'm going to just try to hit the highlights because there's quite a bit. But again, if you want me to spend more time, don't hesitate to let me know. So as Director Smiley said, we're gonna go through a bit on the current funding that's come in and our budget plans for that and how the spending is going relative to the various categories. Embedded in that is also just a little bit of a history because while Director Smiley and I and Director Leach have to live this day by day, there's a lot of moving pieces and parts to orient you to. and then an update to the new funding that has come in and what we know about it so far. So this is an overview of our current budget, how that compares to the last time we spoke, and what expenditures and encumbrances to date look like compared to that current budget. Just as a reminder, and expenditures are really dollars out the door versus an encumbrance when we have an invoice, a contract in, and the funding has been sort of reserved, if you will, in our accounting system and designated that it is about to go out the door. In many cases, and I'll go through in a little bit of detail on some of the items, we just haven't simply gotten invoices in yet, which is a lot of the reason that the funds don't add up yet. Some of that's because in post 1230 that the money just hasn't been, or the action hasn't even been taken yet, or for pre 1230, the check is in the mail, so to speak, or the invoice is in the mail, and some things just need to catch up, and some of that's on the vendor side, and some of that is on the state side as well. In terms of changes to the budget since the last time we spoke, I'm going to hit the highlights here, but again, there'll be more detail on some of the slides. So there's an additional $10 million designated for DD providers, and that's in part out of our work with the court on the consent decree. In addition, there's some changes. The other large number is in health equity zones. Those really target a lot of our high density communities where a lot of the outbreaks have been really tough in the last few months. So we've continued that beyond pre-1230 to post-1230, and then in government readiness. And unfortunately, that has a lot to do with our actual budget for the National Guard not being good enough, and the Pentagon wanting a slice of the pie. In addition, in terms of the reductions, one of the biggest ones was in the vaccine campaign. Some of that has come in from the federal government a little slower, which means that's being shifted, and we haven't had those as many expenses pre-1230 as we thought. And then on pause support, a lot of those were estimates based on what we thought might get used for different eligibility criteria, and some of those have just come in light. We haven't gotten as many applications as we expected. So, moving on, this is the different funding sources. So Director Smiley talked about the Corona Relief Fund and the various different areas. There's some specialized grants in addition to the CRF, particularly for the largest ones are oriented towards testing and vaccine. In the second round of stimulus, there was a good bit of money for the state, but as we'll see in the detailed slides, the only funding that really directly affects the budget out front is the new testing and vaccine money of $71.4 million. In addition, there's FEMA reimbursement. And that FEMA reimbursement, as we will talk about in a couple of slides later, just to reorient you, these are estimates because we don't have specifically designated money to the state. It's about eligible expenses. But that's right now what we currently expect to pull in FEMA. And then general revenue, $105.7 million was appropriated in the last legislative session for support as well, primarily for vaccine and testing. So you'll notice the total on this slide is a bit higher, about $90 million higher than the total on the previous slide. That's because not all these funds can be directly used for the budgeted items up front in many cases. Some of them have to go to some administrative overhead that's not explicitly budgeted out front. Some of it's got timelines that are past the end of the current fiscal year. Some of them are for uses, or pieces of them are for uses that are beyond the things in the budget. And then some of it hopefully will offset a little bit of the general revenue, 105.7, and not as much as you might think. You know, in particular, I think I'll point out, because I've gotten this question a lot, we got $70 million of new testing and vaccine money. Does that mean we can spend $70 million less of general revenue? And unfortunately, it doesn't mean that entirely. It certainly does help, and it does mean we can spend somewhat less. But what it really goes to do is offset the FEMA money, first of all, because the federal government expects you to spend the specialized grants for the specialized uses, and then sort of have FEMA at the end to wrap it up. And as you'll see, we only get 75% of FEMA eligible costs. The state has to kick in the match of 25%. So there is an offset that helps us, but really what the offset is reducing that our need to spend that 25% share that we had budgeted. So there is a help, but not as much help as you might expect from $70 million.
Hey, Director, if I can try to put a finer point, looking at the bottom lines of slides 4 and 5, right? So the total response budget at this point is about 1.82 billion, and then on the revenue side, right, 1.9. Mm-hmm. I think what we're basically saying there is there's $88.8 million that is unallocated in some sort that, may be able to go to other things with that we'd spend additional money in those same categories, or maybe there might be limitations on some of that money and we'd have to find how to spend that. But essentially there's about $88 million there that is unallocated in response budget. Now, also that does include 106 million of general revenue, right? So we could scoop that back. That could also work as well. Is that an accurate reading of the data points there?
Yeah, no, it's an accurate reading. It's unallocated in this discussion of a COVID response. Again, some of it is for stuff beyond the end of the fiscal year, which this sort of rubric doesn't have, or for expenses that really we haven't designated as within this purview. But some of it is also just that we could reallocate. But most of it really would be against the 105. And I'll also say, on close to $2 billion, that's kind of what, there's a little bit in there that's, probably should get thought about as contingency stuff. We have a lot of estimates on how long this whole process will last that are, reasonable guesses, but to be really fair, they're just guesses at this stage of the game.
No, I think that's fair. And then looking at your slide 5 for a second there on the FEMA reimbursement amounts, given the executive order that President Biden signed yesterday, increasing the state share to 100%, I think it was for National Guard, vaccine, contact tracing. We probably could expect, as we figure out exactly, what that rule is, that these FEMA reimbursement numbers might go up. Is that a fair reading?
Yeah, by a couple of single-digit million.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any questions from the committee? I apologize. If you can text me if you do have a question, so I'll know. But I can't see you anymore. So if there's any questions for the committee at this point, let me know.
So, Chairman, I have a follow-up on the FEMA, if I may.
Sure. Senator Palmer.
Thank you. So, John, they talked earlier with regards to the recent executive order signed either yesterday or this morning of the 17. If we can get a breakout of how the National Guard was leveraged up until now, to try and see, not that we don't want to use the National Guard for something that for which they're not appropriate, but if for something that they are, that balance of helping us and what we need to look at here could be beneficial, right? We don't want to use them inappropriately, but the decisions we make, granted, there may be rules and regs that will drive us one way or the other, as the chairman indicates, but how we employ them getting through the pandemic, which is going to last for potentially the rest of this year based on vaccines getting on, unless the Defense Production Act helps more, might be beneficial to see how best to employ or leverage the resources and maximize general revenues. Maximize the stimulus money.
Absolutely, we can do that. You're right. We should constantly be looking at optimization.
Yeah, no, thank you, Director. I think it'd be a good view to take a look at. Senator Acosta?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Wilmer, thank you for your presentation so far. In the first slide, you condensed the HES line items, but in the Excel sheet you guys sent us last night, and thank you for sending that information, the $500,000 that hasn't been spent that was allocated is in the high density communities line item. So, and one of the things we're finding is that at the local level, in CF, being one of the frontline communities that is now distributing the vaccine, we're struggling with mobilizing capital both in the funds, but also in the human capital to help us support these distribution efforts. Now, I don't want to go too into the weeds, but if we think about it as a sample case, I think it's going to speak to problems we might have at the state level once we're really rolling this out. And part of that has been the layers of funds. And so getting HES to give the Pawtucket Central Falls team the money to then support people to distribute the vaccine has been a problem. And so seeing that $500,000 was there that hasn't been used is a bit frustrating. Can you speak a little bit to how we're moving the funds through the channels so that they get used as effectively as possible rather than adding layers? Because the conversation has been, well, if you need help, talk to HES. And then when you talk to HES, it's talk to the Collette people that are mobilizing the Central Falls Pawtucket response team, and then it's back to HES because they're the ones that move the money.
Yeah, it might be, I've got a breakout slide on each one of these. So you did give a detailed spreadsheet, but I've got a breakout slide on spending category 10. Can I defer your question slightly until we get to that slide?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. And yeah, Director, I think that's a good suggestion, and my thought process on that might be either after each spending category or a group of categories, we could take a pause and go backwards for questions on the ones that you maybe
Sure.
had gone over, if that works for you.
Totally.
Okay. Okay, Director, I will turn it back over to you to sort of continue. I think you were probably on slide 6 or 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so again, we get 75 cents on the dollar. What's nice is the reimbursement is for a broad swath. What's harder and just important to note is we don't know exactly what we're going to be eligible to get reimbursed for. This is, to be fair to FEMA, this is very new to FEMA as well as it is to us to be put in this sort of circumstance. And so they're working through the guidance like we are. The other issue is for FEMA money, we can't actually bill FEMA until we have an invoice in hand. Their view of the world is we only reimburse you for things that are dire and extraordinarily important, so you will have to spend the money first. Then you ask us whether it's FEMA eligible or not, which fits their whole purpose of emergency. So I can certainly understand that, but it makes it hard then to budget. I mean, as you saw from the previous slides, we're expecting over 300 million. To date, we've submitted 106 million to FEMA, and not including the 35 million state share. We've received 95 million state share of 32, and then there's another 15 million in total that's still under review proportionally. So there's a lot that we haven't submitted, but a lot of that has to do with the fact is that we haven't spent it yet. We haven't gotten the invoice in yet from the vendor regarding it, and so we can't then go back out to FEMA. So what's somewhat more important, I think, is seeing how we compare to other states in our region, because the region is sort of the FEMA group that has to take action on our expenses. And we've received a lot more than every other state, because not just you have to get the invoices in and spend the money, but there's very, very, very long justifications that have to be put together, far different from the rest of the grants. So the team at Emergency Management has been doing yeoman's work in putting all of this together and maximizing revenue to the state. And you can see we've really been doing a good job getting that in, but there's still a ways to go. So with that, I'm going to go into the detailed slides regarding each of the categories that give a little bit of background on each one and where they sit. Surge is mostly work that has already been done in putting together the hospitals. There is some that has not yet been encumbered, but this is really due to hospital work that we haven't, as the state, been billed for yet. Category 2 is the Hospital Assistance Partnership Program, really helping the hospital system stay financially viable given the expense and revenue reductions that they've seen due to COVID. That has been able to go out the door. Congregate care and child relief. Generally speaking, these programs have been expended and encumbered on time, and we haven't seen too many hiccups. There are some deviations, but most of that has to do with the state having not quite yet allocated all the funds yet in the accounting system. So we've been moving that along pretty well. We also have a category that's sort of a grab all for various items. Human services relief. A lot of these areas have had some been generally on time. This is the point where you can see in 4.3 the additional $10 million for the DD program. The movement of the 12/30 date in particular is helping that program quite a bit. There was a little bit of concern that we could find enough eligible expenses pre-12/30, but now that has been moved, the date has been moved to the CRF eligibility. I think we feel like it'll be reasonably available to get all expenses for that full $10 million of relief. Childcare, the one piece that sort of stands out is the DCYF rate increase, but that's really a journaling issue within the accounting system. Those funds will be set up as the department does its second quarter report.
Director, if I can maybe pause you on 5, we'll try to do them in groups of 5. Talking about category 1 on surge, taking a look at sort of the dollars that we've spent so far, right? So, there was obviously I guess my question would be, we've kind of merged the expenditures and encumbrances between the construction and operating. And I think at this point, it's likely operating and then demobilization that we should probably be budgeting for. I assume not construction, but you could certainly correct me there. I guess my question would be is, for some of these line items that we have these larger sort of tails on, how are we forecasting that, right? So, how did we get to that 23.6 million number? Is that current operating expense, multiplied through the end of 12/31, because that's the new deadline for it? Are there other assumptions? I guess, what's the assumption around that remaining 23.6 million that we have there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When we set this up to begin with, we sit down with the hospitals, because again, most of this underspend is in the operational side of the hospital, and frankly, backlogs that they have in processing everything. In particularly, we'll also see this in the testing work stream to a far greater extent. And when we set this budget estimate up at the beginning, we met with the hospitals on an ongoing basis, looked at the rates of operating that they had, examined what staffing would have to be, and then projected out what it would be based on that. And the variable, of course, really being when do we have to use the hospitals and for how long will we have to use the hospitals. So while a lot of the underspend is due to billing, another piece of it has to do with the use of the hospitals, the degree they're used, and for how long they'll be used. And we work with the modeling team at the Department of Health to refine those estimates. The rates at the hospitals really haven't changed. The variable that can change, though, is how long will those hospitals be needed. And while we have dozens of individuals in the expansion hospitals, right now, our trend in infections is getting better. At the same time, there's concern about more new strains that might be more difficult for everyone. And so, where does that leave us? But we do constantly revise those estimates with the Department of Health.
And the current estimate there at the 23.6 million, do we think that is operating through December? Do we know what the underlying assumption there that gets us to that number?
Yeah, I mean, so the budgeted numbers through 12/30 and beyond 12/30 are, updated as we get better information from the Department of Health. I'd have to get back to you about exactly what the assumption is for the use of the hospitals, but I'm happy to.
Okay. Yeah, no, that would be helpful to know. And it just, I assume the demobilization number of 2.3 is stable. Whenever whenever we shut them down, it's $2.3 million, right? But the 17.2 that's there for operating, I guess my curiosity would be, did we assume that was June? Did we assume that was August? Just to understand, what the full risk could be. If we only budgeted that through June, okay, then for calendar year 2021, we know that, we could have exposure, hopefully not, obviously, but we could have exposure on the backside. So, really the timing, and then also what was included in that. Is that, I think we have 2 facilities open currently, if my memory is correct. And so I assume that number was probably a monthly operating cost of the 2 facilities that are open times, X number of months. It would just be helpful to provide some context around that.
Okay, happy to do that.
Thank you. Senator Cano, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, as a follow-up, just to keep it consistent, it's been my question all over with the minority business enterprise when it comes to storage, like the minority business enterprise, women business enterprise. Do you know if the demobilization is including for that $2.3 billion, the subcontracting of that group?
I don't, but I just heard Director Smiley if he knows more about that.
Yeah, Senator, that budget is inclusive of all 3 sites. For the rest of the committee and public's recollection, the 3rd site being the old Lowe's at Quonset that was never actually finished and never operated. And so that's the only one that has in fact been demobilized. And so, in fact, some of that money is probably in the $6.4 million through 12/30 because it was completed by the end of the year. And there was MBE participation in that demobilization. The other two facilities, the Cranston site and the Rhode Island Convention Center site, they're of course actively being used right now, have not been demobilized. And the Cranston facility, as part of the lease extension that was negotiated with the landlord took responsibility for the demolition, also known as demobilization. And so the state will not be contracting for demobilization because it was a financial benefit that the landlord decided to pick up in exchange for us extending the lease. So the only remaining contract or contracts with respect to demobilization will be for the Rhode Island Convention Center, which had gone out to bid in the fall, and then that procurement was canceled due to the reversal where we thought we were going to start taking it apart and ended up needing it. So thankfully, we had not started disassembling it, and we will start fresh in the spring.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that just to keep consistency and to keep raising the issue that this group of minority business enterprise and women in business enterprise continue to be included in all contracts, and there is no waiver, especially because those are the business owners that have been very, including to be very hit by the pandemic. So thank you for answering that question. And I will like to, if you can, off record, get the information about who got the contracting for the Quonset, was it? That side, just to see who got the contracts for the minority business enterprise, women business enterprise. That would be great. And then for future reference, when that's available, also for the Rhode Island Convention Center. Really appreciate it.
We'll send that to you, Senator, and just to make sure that it's crystal clear, there have been no additional waivers granted.
Yeah.
And we don't intend to do so again. The original waiver on the construction was granted due to the emergency nature of the assembly, but given that we will be able to do an orderly and non-emergency disassembly, then there will be no waiver given, and we'll share that information as it comes in.
Well, I agree that it was an emergency. I disagree that the waiver still happened because the business were ready to go, which I understand that's the past. We're moving forward. So thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Director. Senator Murray? Senator Murray? Maybe muted, Senator. Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Technical difficulties there.
There you go.
I don't recall which slide it was, but it was Rhode Island Works. Either slide, I think it was 11 or 12.
Slide
if we
12.
could bring that up.
Sure.
Yep, it was.
Yep, there we go.
Yep, okay, yep, thank you. So I have questions about, the money that was allocated, what it was allocated for. I know that those families got an increase and a little bump, and they also got an increase in the clothing. I just want to clarify. So right now, as you're probably aware, the clothing allowance for Rhode Island Works per year per child, and that's per school age child, so it doesn't include infants and toddlers, is $30 a year, which is woefully pitiful. So they got an increase up to a one-time increase of 100, correct?
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay, and there was nothing allocated for infants and toddlers under 5 years of age, is that correct?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. I don't believe there was, and I'm just wondering if there is any plans to give these families another bump. These are families that, as you know, the amount of cash assistance that they've received has not increased in 30 years. What they receive is 30% of the federal poverty level. And that's something that, you know, we obviously need to work on. But I just really have a real big concern for these families, you know, during the pandemic and throughout this time. So is there any other plans to reach out and give these families some more assistance? And are we able to do that?
And Senator, if I could jump in 1 second before the director answers, I think Senator Murray's got a very good point here. On this particular line item, I know that the fiscal impact to expand the clothing allowance to non-school age children is not significant overall to the state budget, and there is an extra $100,000 that was allocated in this budget but not spent, and so. I would piggyback on that question from Senator Murray to ask if the administration could look into, you know, the same bump that was already granted to school-age children. If we were to expand that to non-school-age children, could we stay within that budget number, or what would the impact be there?
We'll certainly look into that. I'd also point out where we have made additions more recently, and it's not exactly the same thing, but it is related. So I want to make sure you see it, is when we get to the quarantine and isolation grouping, we do have $1.3 million that we have in cash assistance in Q&I, in particular to help make sure that we can provide enough support such that families can properly isolate at the right time. It's not exactly the same thing, but we do have another cash assistance program, and sometimes those two things end up trading off, because the social workers, the caseworkers that meet are often very related. But we will certainly look into the 0 to 5 question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Director, if we could maybe go to slide 10 on the hospital assistance partnership grants. Would it be possible for the administration to provide us a breakdown of those grants by hospital?
Yes.
And then I think, and just one thing I want to kind of have a conversation about for a minute. I think if my memory is correct, the way the grant application was structured, at least for, I believe, Partnership 2, was we required the hospitals to provide us, essentially what was their total revenue loss due to COVID, less other federal aid or other aid that we had given to them, and sort of aligned to, so essentially what was the net bottom line impact to their financials, if my memory is correct on the Phase 2 program. Mm-hmm. And I guess so, in addition to understanding how the money broke out by hospital, given that we received the total amount that they had been, had lost due to COVID, and now we've funded however much per hospital with these 2 grants, I'm curious to know what % of their losses did we recover through this program, right? So, if the hospitals had lost, when you sum it all up, is it $440 million, and this 220 means we recovered 50% of their losses, or, how does that break down, and how does it break down by hospital? Does that make sense?
Yes, I completely understand.
Okay. All right, that would be great if you could help us with that.
Absolutely.
To understand what the true impact was. Okay. All right. And then, any other questions from the committee? I have a couple more on items, on spending categories 1 through 5. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. I just have 2 more, Director. On slide 11 in spending category 3, the LTSS resiliency, are you familiar with what those expenses were generally?
Yeah, I can describe those. So and these are EOHHS programs that are focused on resiliency in the long-term services and support area. It includes things like nursing facility support, which is about $4.7 million. Incentives for nursing facility transformation, about $9 million. And additionally, it includes some money for congregate setting support teams and some administrative overhead.
Okay. And my reason for asking that question is just along the lines of, and this is something Senator Palmer and I have talked a lot about around, the investments that we made, and also I on this line item, but also in the partnership grants, I believe we required some of those funds to go towards long-term investments to sort of bend the healthcare curve. I guess my question for the LTSS funds and some of the partnership grants, how is the administration looking at those investments that were made and determining if they were successful at bending that sort of model and helping to sort of bring those costs down? I know that's the intention of the investment. I'm just wondering how we plan to monitor that and think about that as we put together the fiscal 2022 budget.
It's a good question. We'll work with our Medicaid director, Ben Schaefer, and get you an answer.
Okay, that'd be great. And Senator Palmer, did I see you were trying to ask a question there?
Yes, I did. Yes, thank you. Just to follow up on that, as the director indicated, having worked on that back, I think beginning of last summer when part of it began, the first phase of that was really looking at infection control at the nursing homes, which is where, unfortunately, I think the percentage may have gone down because more people died, unfortunately, overall. But it was the neighborhood of about 75% of the COVID deaths in Rhode Island were attributed to folks who are in long-term care nursing homes. And then the second piece, because of that, because at one point in time, there were about 750 folks, 800 folks that from nursing homes who had passed away. The second piece really was looking at, Chairman, as you talk about, how to, and we hear the word rebalance, and we've been hearing the word rebalance for, even going back to the time I was on the Governor Armando's Medicaid reinvention effort task force back in 2014, I think it was, the 2015 timeframe. And things have been accomplished, but we really need to see how do we take that next step. Even the work that Senator Feelike had been sponsoring over the years of home modifications to keep people in their home. The only way this is going to be successful and this investment will make sense, otherwise we'll have wasted this money, is to ensure we have the home and community-based services for people in their home so they can stay in their home, and only ultimately nursing homes will have probably the most acute cases for those who are unable to have the services at home. But we really do need to be looking at how are we going to track this through HHS, because that's where it's through DHS probably, ultimately Medicaid paying for it. But we're going to need to, what are the measures and the metrics to ensure that we're getting the return on the investment, and what other additional investment might be needed, even with the stimulus or the COVID money that we're getting now. We probably should follow back on this.
Yeah, no, I agree, Senator. I think, and Director, I thank you for agreeing to talk to the Medicaid director there. And I think this is one of those sort of longer term arcs that I think as we structurally try to put this budget together, be helpful to understand how the administration is looking to view it and to partner with you on determining a strategy there.
No, absolutely happy to do that. And I just realized as I was giving you a list of the expenses, it didn't quite add up to 20. I left out $5.9 million for home and community-based services.
Okay.
Because the senator's right, that is an absolute key component of the $20 million.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then just my last question on spending categories 1 through 5. For the $10 million that we did allocate it's on slide 12, it's item 4.3. For the $10 million that we did allocate for the DD community, how did we arrive at that $10 million, and what were the circumstances there that led us to that allocation?
So that's a good question, and that came from discussions with the court monitor and the DD providers. about what expected need was, and what their losses look like to date. It was a negotiated amount. It wasn't an amount that was built from the ground up, because there are multiple parties involved. And that's probably why it ended up being a relatively round number.
Okay. And who's the lead negotiator on that for the state?
Well, we have two attorneys out of the AG's office that work under contract, as I understand it. When the AG took this on some years ago, before my time, they recused themselves because of issues that they had with some of the providers at the time ongoing with cases, and they brought in outside counsel. So there's outside counsel retained by the Attorney General's office.
Okay. And then ultimately, who's the state official that's directing those two attorneys? Or directing those firms, I guess?
That's a great question. I don't know exactly, and I think I assume if you look under the contract of that outside counsel, it would say something about the Attorney General's office. But you've now reached the limit of my knowledge on that.
Okay, if you could look into that for us and get back to us, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Paolino?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director. You mentioned that when talking about nursing homes and congregate care settings, you mentioned administrative overhead. Is there a dollar amount for that administrative overhead that's being determined? And are there any caps on that?
I mean, there is caps. The federal government is extraordinarily strict on their caps. If I'm looking at these numbers correctly, it's in the order of $300,000 for implementing the $20 million program. I can certainly get you a more exact figure if you wish.
Yeah, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
But the federal government is extraordinarily strict. They've got books of rules about administrative overhead and what states and other entities are allowed to use for administrative overhead.
Okay, thank you.
Senator DePalma?
Thank you, Chairman. Jonathan, just an update back to the chairman's question. With regards to the outside counsel represents the case that was brought, the population of the case of individuals with IDD, which is really now the entirety of the 4,400 plus folks who receive intellectual and development disability services in the state of Rhode Island. The class that was part of that is probably 2,800 or 2,700, but from a state perspective, it's hard to segregate. And I'll say it, we're never going to want to segregate 2,800 from the 4,400 folks that we have totally in the system. So the legal counsel, I believe, is representation of the consent decree. And the consent decree is the 4,400 folks in the consent decree. One other piece about the chairman asked with regards to the 10,000, 10 million, the original finding or statement or assessment from the court monitor had a number higher than that. There's a round number. It also had a number about $2 million per month for 7 months, which was 14. Obviously, working through the effort, it got settled down, not settled up. 10 million was the number associated with that. So just want to make certain when we talk about the outside counsel, we talk about the consent decree is on the population of individuals with intellectual development disabilities in Rhode Island.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And I think that the details on this one are really important. And, it's a very complex issue. It's a very big issue. And also one with some significant dollar signs on it. And so I think this is an area that I think we need to continue to add some oversight and focus to. And so, Director, I appreciate your willingness to help us out there to determine, who's really giving the direction to the attorneys negotiating on behalf of the state there, and make sure that we can determine how the best way for the legislature to participate or provide feedback there. Okay, moving a little bit further, Director, do you maybe want to go through categories 6 through 9, and then we can take another pause?
I am happy to.
Thank you.
So just getting situated. So supplies, this is in an area that most of the expenditures have happened earlier. There are some vaccine supplies that we bought, which has been, very, very helpful as we get into the vaccine side. And mostly we've been hitting the budget. There's just a few outstanding invoices. Testing, you'll notice some very, very large discrepancies between budget and expenditure and encumbrance, especially in the lab processing contract. The lab processing contracts have a particular nuance that the labs have to first go out and bill insurance before they can come back and bill the state. And because of the volume they're running, and because of the unique nature of these lab processing, the insurance companies are a bit overwhelmed right now. So there's a pretty big backlog that's being dealt with between the lab processing companies and the insurance companies before the invoices can get to the state, and we can even see what our liability is. We've made some adjustments to the budget, based on what we think we know in terms of volume. We can see volume pretty well, and certainly we have estimates of what we think the insurance companies will do. But it's still leaving us a pretty big encumbrance and expense backlog. But these are still, or the estimates right now in the budget are still our best estimates for what's going on. Another large area of discrepancy is in the testing site staffing, and that's really due to the fact that this is a new beyond 12/30, so these are expenses that we haven't really incurred yet. This is due to the fact that the National Guard conceptually could get rolled off in March by the federal government. So that might be an area, assuming that doesn't happen, that we don't have to necessarily pay out all of that money if it gets better. And I think, Senator DePalma pointed out that the Biden administration maybe signed an executive order recently to change the FEMA reimbursement for the National Guard, so that'd be an additional place that those numbers might change some as well. In addition, something that also kind of stands out, at least for me, is the state laboratory staffing. Right now, because we are dedicating so much of the personnel cost for health and public safety already to CRF, we're having a bit of a problem disaggregating those numbers from these numbers. So you'll see later those numbers might be increased by a little bit of 1.2 million, and this is the reason we have a lag here, but it all ends up netting out. We just can't quite tell sometimes exactly what that FTE is doing, so which category to put them in. Contact tracing and case investigation is, another area with some discrepancies, but those are really having to do with the fact that we just haven't reached the post 12/30 numbers. for expenditures and encumbrances, because we expect that work to be ongoing for quite a while now. This is still very, very important work to making sure that the state stays healthy. And then category 9, quarantine and isolation. We have this broken out in a couple of different places, or a couple different slides rather. So in QI, again, sort of like in testing, we have a little bit of a discrepancy, but most of that has to do with the 12/30 changing. Here we also have this broken out by the different housing programs that we have for quarantine and isolation. There's further breakout here in the second section. I pointed out the cash assistance in particular. That's been an area that has been very, very helpful to us to really make sure that people can stay isolated, because just often a little bit of money can allow people to be in circumstances that are far more helpful and healthy during this pandemic.
All right, thank you, Director. Let me just take a quick pause there on categories 6 through 9. On the testing, actually, let me go back for 1 second. So on sort of supplies, right? So we've got about 800,000, it appears, budgeted for supplies through I guess my question for all these will be similar, right? For supplies, for testing, for tracing, I guess similar to the hospital operating cost question. What assumptions are we using there, right? So did we assume this is enough supplies to get us through June, August? Is this enough money for testing through June or August, and how did we get that number? Is it our current monthly run rate? Is it a forecast of where the supplies are? So I guess for all three of those categories, that would sort of be my question there. And, if there's anything you can't answer now, but I'm certainly happy to take that as a follow-up as well.
Yeah, I think we best give you this in the follow-up, just because you can probably even show a little bit of a graphical.
Yep.
And then the exact dates. I mean, it's a bit easier on supplies, because at least from a pure budgeting standpoint, as you can see, it's almost all been spent, and we did it before 12/30. But to your point, it also involves a forecast, because we have stockpiles to be used, ongoing throughout the rest of the pandemic. And I guess I'd add also that these are a bit conservative, because the goal is to have some left over at the end, which is just-in-time inventory, given the supply chain disruptions that we've seen across the country in these areas. And if there is a supply disruption, it could endanger people's lives.
Yeah. Okay. And then just on the testing side of it, so one, thank you, appreciate that follow-up. On the testing side of it, I know you had mentioned, I think, something there around insurance billing for some of these costs. I guess my question would be for, this is obviously a very large line item, right? 195 million towards testing, which we should be doing as much as we can, obviously. But taking a look at our expenditures and encumbrances there, and again, what we're forecasting out, have we had enough experience billing the insurers to get any idea of what our recovery rate would be, and is that factoring into these numbers, or is it still a finger in the wind number or a conservative figure that we're using?
Yeah, it's the lab processing companies themselves that are billing the insurance companies. So we're kind of one step removed.
Yeah.
We do have some experience, and the estimates do use that experience. I personally think that there's more variance on how long do we need to keep this going, and how intensely, or how many people are willing to get tested. because while we want to really incentivize testing, bring it to the people and make it easier for them, at the end of the day, it also requires their willing participation. And so that's another variable that is really influencing the model. So while the delay has a lot to do with the insurance companies, I think the modeling risk, if you will, are around testing volume, and that has to do with date and how many people we can incentivize to get tested.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Chairman, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure there's not confusion, because I've heard it referenced a couple of times on the columns, just to orient the committee so that we don't get some misunderstandings. So on this slide, for example, the 190, I've heard reference that last bottom right number is the budget. That's the variance column, actually. So the expenditures plus encumbrances in this case is 80 million. The original budget had been 276 million. And so the variance is 195 million.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure there wasn't confusion on that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Director. I think it's probably a little misspeak on my part. What my head's going is, what are we budgeting out for the future? I probably should say forecast it out, right, to get there, but it's a good clarification. Thank you. Yeah, so Director Wilmer, I think on this one, I think, as part of that follow-up around our assumptions around the model going forward for testing that we were talking about earlier, if we could just include something there on the assumption for the insurance bill rate, that'd be helpful.
Will do.
Thank you. Senator Cano?
Thank you. Can we go, I think, to slide 18? I have a question about the cash assistance program. Just for clarification purposes, I wanted to make sure I understand. This is the cash assistance that you were talking about, the Rhode Island Works. Is that the expansion of the cash assistance that you're talking about, or this is a different one?
Yeah, this is a different one. This is an additional cash assistance program. They're cash cards given to individuals and families who need to quarantine and isolate. It's designed to cover, food, clothing, income loss, in enabling them to, stay in places other than, sometimes a high density area. So giving them enough cash that they can properly isolate and protect themselves and their community.
So thank you for that. And also for clarification, does this cash assistance program, were the undocumented community eligible for this type of benefit, or were they left out of this benefit because of some guidance that you needed to follow? That's just.
Now, I'm pretty sure they are eligible. I can certainly check, and Director Smiley, if you know for sure.
They are, Senator Cano, these cash cards are held at the Department of Health. And when an individual tests positive or is informed that they need to quarantine because they're in close contact of someone who's tested positive, they're asked some information about their ability to quarantine. And if they indicate that they, for work or income levels, are unable to effectively quarantine, then these are provided regardless of immigration status. These are relatively, it's at the discretion of the caller, and so there's few questions asked as possible to enable people to effectively quarantine.
That's great, and it goes the same for food support, right? I assume for the same. It doesn't, the eligibility goes for everybody. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we're working through multiple community groups that not only provide food supports to undocumented Rhode Islanders, but also culturally appropriate food supports. So people like the work that's being done in Higher Ground International, the Alicia Project, Family Services of Rhode Island, and others. So this is broadly available and hopefully comforting to Rhode Islanders who need to stay home at a difficult time.
Thank you for the clarification. Great.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Director. Director Wilmer, do we perhaps want to proceed to items 10 through 15?
Chairman, if I may?
Senator Palma.
Real quick, Director Wilmer, on the contract, you don't have to go back, on the contact tracing piece. I'm not certain if other senators have heard it. I heard it from a couple of constituents who, from a contact tracing perspective, we're notified, and they're sometimes notified week or more after a particular incident had occurred, sometimes up to 10 days. I want to believe the contact tracing is important. That's what I want to believe, but I'm not certain maybe we do. The investment we made in there, and I think it was up in the neighborhood of $10 million or in the $1 million range, is it in fact giving us a return on the investment? How do we know that if the investment we're making in contact tracing is providing the value that we need for what we're expecting there? Maybe I'm not asking you to address it here. Maybe we can follow up subsequent to that. But I'm not going to say just speak anecdotally because I think that's the case. But having heard from some constituents who called me about it, it brings up for pause of that the investment in the contact tracing is really producing what we want. And if it's not, then let's do it differently or do something different. But the money can be better spent.
I could speak to that briefly. It's a valid concern, and we ask ourselves that question regularly to make sure that we're continuing to challenge ourselves and our assumptions. Admittedly, and this had been discussed a couple times at press conferences, we had fallen behind in the ability to timely contact folks. So this is directly related to the surge where we just found ourselves overrun by volume. I have a data report that was shared internally amongst the COVID team today that now reports that 76% of contacts are contacted within 3 days and 40% within 24 hours. And so we track this as a service metric regularly, and we will continue to improve. So that backlog has been worked down. Additionally, the contact tracing and case investigation is not the only part, and one of the things that we've learned, and perhaps you've heard anecdotally from your constituents, is we've had a hard time getting folks to answer health department phone calls, and particularly in certain communities. And so we've implemented some process improvements as well, and we're now texting as well, and we've found that the texting has gotten a higher response rate. So we text a contact, and then if they and then we can connect them to a phone call, so they're less intimidated by or put off by, or some people just don't answer their phone calls. And then finally, the other piece of this is just testing itself. We see and still see the value in contact tracing, but we find that the time at which someone truly isolates and is disciplined about their isolation, because we know what a burden that is on so many, is when they get a positive test, more so than when they get told that they were a close contact of someone, which is a luxury that some people just cannot afford to do. And so this is in conjunction with our continued increase in testing, and we tested 20,000 people yesterday. I think all of you will recall back in the spring when we were testing 100 people a day, and we said we were going to start testing 1,000 people a week, and internally we did a big gulp because we thought, oh my God, how are we going to do 1,000 people a week? And we're up to 20,000 a day. And so we continue to make improvements. It's a really valid question, and we challenge ourselves and ask ourselves that question regularly, but we track it. I know you're someone who appreciates metrics and data, Senator, and we try to stay on top of that metric to make sure we're making progress.
Thank you, Directors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you, Director. Okay, Director Wilmer, we want to proceed to categories 10 through 15?
Certainly, and maybe I'll suggest, since Senator Acosta had a question about section 10 here, as I go through it, can we just pause here and handle that question? So I want to make sure we get it right.
Absolutely.
So this area in particular has been pretty important to us because of the infection rate in some of the more densely populated communities in Rhode Island. As you saw from the beginning, part of the slide deck, we added $3 million beyond 1230 for health equity zones and moved about $500,000 in the 10.3 area high density communities from 1230 to beyond 1230. Just to sort of orient you, a lot of the high health equity zone money is based a lot around the access, communications, and canvassing aspects. The other community mitigation effort is a lot to do with staffing of this area, and then the high density communities 10.3. Most of that is in personal protective equipment, some of which we've already purchased and supplied. So that shift of $500,000, we didn't end up spending it in pre-1230 because some of the supplies we already had, and are allocating that to post-1230. But to be very fair, this is an evolving area, and we're certainly trying to do more. Maybe Senator Acosta, if you want to ask about your question.
Sure, and thank you, Director Wilmer. I think part of what I'm trying to get at is we've started vaccine distribution in CF, and we're doing it through these line items. Other parts of the state will not be doing that. And one of the things that we're finding is that there are a bunch of expenses and needs that some of these line items presently don't take into consideration. So when you administer the vaccine, people need to stay around in case there's some kind of anaphylactic reaction or something else. And so we're currently paying our firefighters overtime hours because they're staffed and they have to do, the regular firefighter duties. We need paramedics to be on site to make sure that folks are okay. We need more than one. And so we're incurring these really high costs that then we need to kind of run back and forth between HES, the Pawtucket Central Falls Response Team, Defeat COVID Team, the Department of Health, and then the city finances to try to figure some of these things out. And, I think it would be helpful to make the process a little bit clearer for how municipalities that are undertaking these efforts can get to these funds, but then also use those lessons to make sure that when other municipalities undertake these efforts, they're prepared for what's coming. Because there were a lot of these things that were, like many parts of this pandemic, we're building the plane while we're flying it. But we should take advantage of watching what we're doing and where we might be needing to redirect some of the funds to make sure that when the state does that, it can do it better.
I appreciate that. We will certainly get back to you about exactly how community organizations can access some of these funds if they're not already. And I do appreciate the point about lessons learned through this and how we might be able to use that, especially in vaccine rollout at the community level across the state. In particular, I'll check on the paramedic issue because.
Yeah, I think there's that, and the other big one is scheduling. So having folks who can, because right now, if you do it through a site, we're not quite at the Florida Eventbrite, disaster, but people can kind of fill a slot, and they might not meet all the criteria, but that slot is then taken up. So you really do need people to be managing the appointments and to spread it out so that you don't have, a bunch of people in a waiting room or something like that. And having the facilities for that in some of the densely populated communities is really a limitation.
Absolutely. All right, I will move on to category 11. So this is the tech enablement. These are IT costs that are specifically devoted to the areas of testing and contact tracing, direct response to COVID. We do have some lag in invoices from some vendors and a little bit of development beyond 1230 in our Salesforce database, in particular to work on changes dealing with vaccine. But largely, this has been deployed and very successful. Housing, as we've talked a little bit about earlier, has been a very, very important grouping to make sure that we can support people in this difficult economic time. We do have about $1.5 million in delays and invoices for housing and rental assistance support. The first item, we might be able to reduce the budget a little bit here. We didn't quite get as much take up. It'd be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but there might be something that we have coming through on that relatively soon. You'll see nothing so far on navigation assistance and legal services. These are funds that administered through the Rhode Island Foundation, and we simply haven't gotten the billing from them quite yet. Business and workforce readiness. These are some of the original business grant programs. Most of that is completely out the door now, and only some slight variants as we've gone through these areas. Further, back to work Rhode Island. We've really gotten most of this underway, which has been amazing with the job training and wraparound services to find and develop jobs for those that have been put out to work. And there is a bit of a lag in the DBR and RIDO enforcement inspection. That's not because we don't have inspectors out the door. It's really that, to be fair to the RIDO staff, they just haven't quite prioritized moving that journal entry over in the accounting system yet, but I'm assured that will happen very, very soon. And then certainly a lot of money out the door in our hospitality, arts, and tourism support programs. And I can go through more detail on these, Mr. Chairman, if you wish.
No, I think you can go through 15 and then, yeah.
Okay. Education summer. So this really hasn't changed much. There's a little bit more that is left, but this is sort of an accounting of what we did this summer for students to help be able to bridge some of the time and provide some childcare and youth enrichment. K-12 reopening. The CRF distribution was put forth in the budget, and it's all been accounted for, but not quite all of it has been expended yet. Certainly also there's a lot in K-12 reopening, in particular equipment that some of our school districts have really needed for instruction and statewide curriculum in this time of remote learning, and then direct support for high-density state-run districts. And then higher education, these were allocated in the budget, but additional funding to offset eligible expenses, largely personnel, but not entirely, at the 3 higher ed institutions. It's important to note in these that there is quite a bit of additional money in the new stimulus in both higher ed and K-12, and we'll talk about back in a few more slides.
Okay. All right, thank you, Director. Just a quick question on category 11 on slide 20, related to the dev support in the Crush COVID app. For the remaining spend there, right? So the forecast is about 5.3 remaining that hasn't been spent or encumbered. 3.4 was on the Salesforce, and then and only about 400,000 on the Crush COVID app. Could you talk a little bit about, is that continual development of the Salesforce tool? Is that, just operating of the tool? If it's just operating, 3.4 seems hefty. So I just wanted to ask about that.
No, that's certainly a very, very a good question. It does include the licensing for the Salesforce tool. I can get you the exact breakdown between the licensing and development costs. I think it also includes development costs regarding vaccine post 12/30, but I can get you that breakdown.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. And just public service announcement, I used the portal website the other day to schedule another test, and they're now saving the prior information you entered, so you don't have to enter your health insurance every time and your race and date of birth and all that, so that's definitely making it a lot easier. Senator Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Director, can you go to slide 21? As you could imagine, when we asked for the extension on the eviction moratorium, we heard a lot of got a lot of grief from some of our landlords. Could you explain a little bit how the housing and rental support is working? And well, let me have you do that, and then I'll ask my follow-up or my other.
I'm going to defer that question to Director Smiley and see if he wants to answer that.
Yeah, Senator, we were pretty upfront about it. We struggled early on to get the rental assistance money out the door. The first tranche of rental money came with some complicated strings attached that required income verification and other requirements, such as you needed to be imminently at risk of eviction and a certain number of months behind. And we worked originally through Crossroads to push that money out the door, and it was slow going. We shifted and enlisted the help of the CAP agencies and put Rhode Island Housing more central in the role, and they were able to effectively move more of that money out the door. The real promise with respect to rental assistance is the new funding, and we'll talk about this in a little bit when we get to the new bill, but there's a significant amount of new rental assistance money that's coming from the feds in the stimulus package that was passed last month in December. All the details on that are not yet approved, and so we're not quite sure what all the rules and regulations will be, but we're hopeful that they are more flexible than the original funding that was provided, because it turned out to be burdensome and cumbersome for what we know is a very serious need. And it was frustrating in many cases where people clearly were falling behind on their rent, but it wasn't until they were at imminent risk of eviction that they were eligible for the funds. And so we'll be working very closely with Rhode Island Housing again for this new funding, and hopefully have a chance to comment on the rulemaking before the final rules are set by the feds.
Thank you, Director. That's really helpful, and frankly, part of why I asked is I'm not usually a champion for landlords, I should say that, but I understand that this is a situation where potentially helping them would be helping the renters, and could be cheaper if we were helping landlords pay their mortgage rather than covering renters' rent. Right? People don't get into this because they're benevolent property owners. They get into this because they're making profit. And so rent tends to cost more than what the mortgage amount is. And if there was a way that we could target supporting landlords making their mortgage payment to the bank and saying, look, at best you're going to break even, you're not going to make a profit during this, but it's better than not getting nothing and having to wait to go through the eviction process. This may be a way to cover way more people and to keep banks getting their mortgage payments and kind of make both sides happy in a way that I think that the current system just isn't doing.
Yeah.
It's excellent feedback, and generally we agree. And in many cases, landlords are individuals or a family that maybe has held a three-family for a generation, and it's how they pay their mortgage. And so, we had worked with the courts on an eviction diversion program that was meant to help mediate and negotiate conversations just like that. That remains, in our view at least, something of a gold standard process, but that is so cumbersome and time consuming on a one-by-one basis for what is such a widespread problem. And so, again, we hope that there's flexibility such that we can move more quickly, push these funds through, not push it to the brink. We also believe there's going to be some additional flexibility with these funds where that it can go for other related items such as utility relief, because that's another important piece of the puzzle. It's not just paying the rent, but keeping the gas on and the electric on and every other bill that a family could fall behind on.
Yeah, and Director, I think the committee has identified housing as one of the priorities for this session, and so our next hearing will be focusing on revenue. I think the one after that we may very well focus in on housing, and I think the timing may work out quite well with that, because we may have some of the rules from the federal government on that $200 million pot. In addition to taking a look at, we have the upcoming bond that we're putting out for housing, and there's some other proposals around housing, and so I think the committee is going to be very eager to engage with the administration on the housing topic this year.
We look forward to that. The Senate's been a terrific leader on housing for many years now.
We like that distinction. It's an issue that we just find very important. Senator Felag.
Thank you am I on, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you are.
My question is relative to, as we go through this transition in governorship, who's really in charge of the vaccination rollout or continuation of the vaccination process?
So the governor's COVID team, Governor Raimondo's COVID team, remains in place, and Governor McKee has committed to keeping the same team in place. I can attest personally, because I'm on most of those calls, that the Lieutenant Governor's team has been fully integrated and engaged for the last 2 weeks or so, ever since the news became public. And so the leadership of the vaccination team is really three-headed. One, Dr. Philip Chan, who is the consultant medical director of the Rhode Island Department of Health, leading up vaccinations. Alicia Mahalakas, who is a senior leader of the Department of Health and who heads emergency preparedness for RIDO in normal times and has been fabulous. And then Courtney Hawkins from the Department of Human Services from the cabinet. And so those three leaders, they have specific roles and responsibilities, but those three leaders lead up the vaccination team. And Governor McKee has indicated that that team will stay in place and has been, he and his team have been getting up to speed diligently.
All right, I guess my question is relative to the different categories. As we roll through those categories, I'm very concerned about the 75 and over rollout. And the reason why I say that is there's approximately about 80,000 individuals that are 75 and over, and we're vaccinating a good amount of those individuals through the assisted living and the nursing homes and those kind of care, but we're not giving the proper message to those individuals as to when or how or why they can get this vaccination. Some reports have indicated that they contact their pharmacy. Some indicate that they should contact their doctor. Some indicate they should contact their community leaders. And there's no clear message as to how we're going to vaccinate this particular group. So can you expound on where we are in that process?
Sure, I'll do my best and can follow up with those three individuals, fill in any gaps. But the the 75 plus group, which we would consider in phase 1.5, we're in phase 1, and then there are certain subcategories of phase 1. 1.5 is all other 75 or older. So there, as you rightly point out, there are people who might be in a nursing home who would be vaccinated earlier than a 75-year-old living independently with no other underlying health conditions or comorbidities. So this final group of 75 plus that doesn't meet one of the other earlier categories, they will schedule their vaccine and learn about their vaccine through their primary care physician. If they do not have a primary care physician, then they should be in contact with local community health center or other local provider. As we get close to moving into that phase, we will ramp up our communications specifically to that group. We struggle, our primary and fundamental problem is supply. Everything that we're receiving is going into arms. We do not have a stockpile of vaccines. And so part of it, while it is good feedback for us to do a better job to know what to expect and that there's misinformation, we are not yet ready to start scheduling folks or even lining them up for more specific questions such as when and where, because we don't know on a weekly basis exactly how many doses that we'll be receiving. We're getting close to 1.5, and Dr. Chan reported today that he expects to start communicating to that group in the next week or two, but it will still be several weeks before they start to receive vaccines.
And again, that's the fear that a lot of those residents are contacting me, especially in Warren, because as you know, the last 4 weeks, Warren was the highest per capita in the whole state of Rhode Island. This week, fortunately, we went down to 17, but by the same token, there's a great fear and people want to be sure they're vaccinating. And I get a little leery when we say, call up your primary care physician, because we've seen where, how are we assured that those individuals, all these physicians are going to put it into the arms of the 75 and over? What kind of a cross-check do we have in terms of providing them with vaccine that has to be kept at a low temperature and ensure they get it out quickly without them saying, well, we tried, but we got to get it out to whoever we can, and the 75 and over community gets left behind?
Yeah, so the scheduling will be done through one's PCP, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the administration will be done through the PCP. As you rightly point out, there are concerns around storage and such. And so it may be that the actual vaccination takes place at distributed sites of vaccination locations, but the scheduling and the most methodical and easy to track and trusted way to go about it is through one's PCP, which is why that's our primary source. We have a strong working relationship between RIDO and the providers. We trust that they're not going to put it in that they're not going to give it to populations that are not prioritized. But I'm not at liberty to say, it's not my expertise really to say exactly where and by what method the vaccination will occur. All I know, and we've said publicly, is that the primary scheduling purpose will be performed through one's PCP.
Okay, yeah, because it seems to reason that you would do it within a community-based type thing, because then it's easier to keep the vaccination. I mean, let's put it this way: when you guys did the emergency personnel, you did it through a central location where communities like the firefighters or the first responders went to a central location. So I would assume it could be similar to that with 75 and over, based on their doctors indicating that they qualify for this in scheduling. I just don't want to see a mass group of individuals standing outside of CVS or standing outside a doctor's office looking to get vaccinated when they may not be getting that shipment at that particular time.
Yeah.
Understood. We share that concern. And the other thing maybe just for the purpose of rumor and myth dispatching, there is no waiting list. There is no list for folks to get on. We get this question regularly. Can I get my name on the list? There is no such list. There is, when we move into future phases, we will work through those phases methodically. And frankly, we're trying to avoid what we're seeing in other states right now, where there are lines like that, and where there are appointments made and then canceled as supplies dwindle, people sleeping out overnight. We think that that's not a way to treat our fellow residents. We also think that it's exactly the kind of thing in the middle of a pandemic for a respiratory, a contagious disease, that we do not want big crowds like that. And so we will be working through and continue to work through in methodical groups. And Senator, you're right that it is likely to occur in some centralized locations that are well suited and well prepared for both storage, to eliminate waste, and to make it as safe a place for patients, residents to queue and receive their vaccine.
I appreciate those responses. And it's really just to make sure that we advertise it correctly for that population 75 and over. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Director. And I know all of us appreciate you bringing that information back to the planning task force there. I know Senator Cano, I believe, has a question on the housing slide here. Senator.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to reiterate what Senator Acosta had mentioned. I think it's great that we're going to have a hearing on housing after, but I just have one quick question about the eviction diversion program. Is that the Safe Harbor program? I just want to know who is coordinating it and who is administrating that program for the eviction diversion. Can you just give me an update on that one?
It's the United Way is administering the eviction diversion program.
That's the Safe Harbor, right? Yes.
I think that is right.
For the CRF funded program, right? I'm just making sure.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a follow-up comment to Senator Felig's questions about the 75 and older. And I just wanted to express my concerns around those individuals who don't have a PCP, because you're saying that you primarily are going to go through folks, primary care providers. But for those folks who do not have a PCP or who do not have adequate transportation, I just have concerns about how we're going to get the messaging out to those. And if, we can have an offline conversation about your plans around this, but I just think it's really important to remember that, we don't want those folks who may be particularly vulnerable to get left behind.
We share that concern, Senator. I'd be happy to, probably better off that you have a conversation with the vaccine team leadership. And we're going to rely on many of the same supports that we've relied on for the testing, where we've also reached hard to reach communities who don't have PCPs through community health centers, community leaders, and such. But I'm sure they would welcome your feedback in that discussion.
So much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cano.
Just like we are in the topic, I just wanted to give you a little update of what I've been getting in Pawtucket. There's a little confusion between the state distribution of vaccines with the federal government distribution of vaccines. So I'm getting a lot of calls of 75 older individuals that are concerned that they have heard that in Pawtucket, some of the high rises already have dates to schedule vaccines, but that is from the federal government that have that been scheduled that has nothing to do with the state. So I just wanted to make that point, that it's important to clarify that the state distribution is different from the federal distribution, and there is a lot of confusion in getting tons of calls, and people are getting mad because obviously maybe a friend of them live at the high rise and they're having a day, and they don't have an idea when is the rollout from the state and when they can qualify. So I just want to make sure that that clarification, as a feedback, is there. Maybe you could just make it public when you do your press conference.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, I think we've hit the questions on that section. Jonathan, you want to go through 16 through 19?
Certainly.
I apologize. Senator Palmer, did you have a question?
I did, if I- just quickly, just a comment also with regards to, I suspect I was going to say Senator Wilmer, but maybe someday it'll be Senator Wilmer.
I just had a promotion.
At the federal level, maybe. With regards to folks who may need, I guess it'd be Medicaid, if folks who are on Medicaid, the non-emergency medical transportation should help facilitate some of that transportation for folks for, I think, I would suspect the vaccine. That's what it's for, right? But the one basic question, I don't want you to go back, but under Section 13, which is associated with the, I spent a fair amount of time over the last 9 months with our Lieutenant Governor on the small business efforts and getting the money to the small business. It hasn't been our stellar program, good program. Our efforts to try and get that to them, we did make some changes along the way, so that was good. But the if you go to the next page, it had the pause stuff on it.
The pause, so section 20?
I guess maybe it was on the next page, the second part of 13. There'd be a question on some of the business interruption supports and some of the, I'll say, take it outside. So I think some of those work. How do we, not for tonight, but I think we need to look at, based on some of the investments we made, like we talked earlier with regards to contact tracing. The investments we made would take it outside. Did they return the investment we expected them to make? I don't know that we know what the return was going to be, but it's going to be a not that we need an exercise by any means to make work, but I think sorry, as we move forward into this next phase of federal stimulus dollars, which I believe. So I'll ask this question now, just in generic fashion. I was going to ask it at the end, but what I'm hearing is the new money is supposed to have less restrictions on it than the previous did. Right or wrong?
So the new money, the 900 billion stimulus that's already been signed?
Yes.
I think generally it's undetermined what the restrictions are, but there's certainly nothing in it like a CRF. So generally speaking, it's, I think, very clearly more restrictive than the original stimulus, which, because the CRF had so much money in it, that was for a very flexible use.
Okay, I thought I heard, I'm not sure it was the governor that said it, somebody had said it, that they thought the flexibility was quite large. I thought it was just the opposite, but as we move forward, let's be thinking about what are those measures and metrics, and before we put significant money in somewhere, whatever significant is, let's sort of test it to say, is it producing what we want, right? Before, if not, do something else to affect the change we want. That's all.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, Jonathan, 16 through 19, and we can take a pause.
All right, that sounds good. So the next two slides are government readiness, and they are, generally about support for the state government directly, and keeping other business operations going throughout the pandemic in various different areas. There's a bit of a delta, but that has really less to do with money not being expended and really just allocations in the accounting system. The one piece that is certainly very, very different is the money for the National Guard. We had, I mean, we had, you know, I think it's just clearly we made a mistake in budgeting this. We looked at the actual costs associated with the National Guard, their expenses, but in the FEMA regulation, they require an overhead to be paid to the DoD, even though they're not doing anything directly, and that needed to be added in as well. Now, again, the National Guard expenses might change more based on this new federal executive order or guidance that we're hearing about today. But in addition, the dates for eligibility of the National Guard and how long the emergency designation is continued. In addition, just here's a more detailed breakdown that we've done in the past about various expenses and where they've landed. I've got some detail about exactly what the money's for, if you'd like to go over it. And then we've got sort of a catch-all category of other expenses. It has a lot in our communications area, data modeling and analytics, and even legal. Finally is our current budget and our vaccine campaign. As we noted at the beginning of this presentation, these have expenses have come down a little bit from our initial estimates, primarily in our pre-12/30 budget, due to the timing of when we got some of this from the federal government. Certainly there's a lot that hasn't happened yet, which is the reason why the expenditures and encumbrances are very slight at this time for many of the reasons that we all talked about earlier. And then if I could just go through, I think there's 6 categories here, Mr. Chairman, but I think we can roll these out. This next one's fairly straightforward. These are the eligible public health and public safety personnel costs that were allocated in the FY20 and FY21 budget. And they're just reflected here for review. And then the pause support program and where we are with expenditures and encumbrances. So these are the more recent benefit increases. I should have mentioned earlier, which I didn't, that in addition to the Rhode Island Works benefit increase we had earlier, there was another one here in the pause support as well. In addition to the SNAP benefits that we did, some of which were also more oriented towards cash. The 2 areas that had, if you'll recall, the 2 areas we had that had a little bit less money than the initial allocated budget were in the UI benefits. Our budget estimate originally was based on our modeling of eligibility. It was $8.5 million less, so that 46.5 had a bit of a larger budget. It was closer to 55 million earlier, but our modeling was a bit off, so less money was spent. And then our restaurant, bars, and business support, that went through our Department of Revenue, and as they went through the modeling, 42 million is allocated, and originally in our budget in mid-December, we had closer to 60 million allocated for that program. So that is the last section, Mr. Chairman. If there are
Okay.
questions on items 16 through 20.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I think the item, no question here, but I think the item you mentioned around the National Guard costs, I think we'll continue to look at that and update that as the executive order becomes clear. One thing I did want to ask related to, similar to other questions that we've had tonight that I've had around sort of run rate and how do we get the number and, where's that coming from? Specifically the remaining 29.2 million that we've, assumed we'll continue to spend on vaccines. I guess my question there would be, threefold, and this may be something to more follow up on and think about as we look at the new federal money as well, but sort of a three-part question, which is, how did we get that number? Two, I know we've added some money since the December, so that's positive. I think, obviously, if there's anything we can do in this area more, I think is an area we want to, but how does that then maybe tie in with some of the new federal money that we're receiving specifically for vaccines? Does the new money specifically for vaccines plus this required, or can some of the money that's being spent on vaccines and the new money, we could repurpose this money in a different way? That would kind of be my question there for, what are we expecting the total vaccine cost to be? And then what's the most efficient way for us to fund said cost?
So those second part of the questions I could answer now
Okay.
to the best of my ability. I mean, we certainly want to get back to the modeling and all the other modeling questions. So if you go back to some of the beginning slide, this is our budget, sort of separating revenue sources from budget, because a lot of the revenue sources kind of overlap. As you'll see, I think I've got this right. I hope I did. That we got less than $10 million in new vaccine revenue.
Yeah.
And as we talk about, that's not really changing our budget, but what it is doing is allowing us to not use FEMA in many cases, which doesn't give us a one-for-one benefit, but it does give us 25 cents on the dollar. So there's a little bit of I guess I won't call it a bait and switch, but there is a little bit of a misrepresentation sometimes, because it looks like we got $70 million new money in vaccine and testing, and it looks like that can offset directly costs we have, but those costs were already offset by FEMA at 75%. So there is a benefit to us, but it's really only a 25% benefit of the expenditures that we're already planning in this budget.
Okay. That's a fair assumption. Okay, thank you. And then the other question that I had on this related to what you have in item 19, which is the state payroll support that we were able to charge the eligible positions. For those positions, obviously, I think there would be those positions we would be able to continue to cover through this federal money if we had it for the last two quarters of fiscal 21 and potentially the first 2 quarters of fiscal 22. If we had that federal money, we could continue that through. So depending on how this stimulus package that was signed in December plus potentially another one, there could be additional flexibility that would open up this section of money. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, I mean, you've heard that the CRF date changed, and we've gotten another year, which certainly helps us protect ourselves against anything that might be deemed not eligible.
Yep.
But we really have allocated the CRF, and unfortunately don't have any more to dedicate towards public safety and public health salary expenditures. There wasn't any additional CRF in the $900 billion package that was signed most recently. Still to be seen what is in the possible next round of stimulus.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Senator DePalma.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, with regards to the you go to the next page on the pause supports. So I'm not sure if this was a higher number at one point with regards to the pause supports for the businesses impacted. It was originally the 2 weeks, then it became the 3 weeks because the pause continued a week. The criteria for it, and folks in taxation did yeoman's work. They did a phenomenal job to get that out in what was probably an impossible period of time, deadline that they had to make that happen. In doing so, obviously, we made some changes along the way to make certain businesses that didn't necessarily fit some of the criteria could also fit. As we move forward, and there's clearly some lessons learned there. We won't go through them here in any detail because it's not important. What is important, though, as we do things moving forward, I'd encourage the administration to sort of not say stress test it, but reach out to some folks in the particular community, however community is defined, that would potentially leverage these resources, whether it's bars, restaurants, gyms, whatever the things that are forced to be being closed, and say, go try the application, tell us what you find. A lot was found very quickly. It was fixed very quickly, but people went through and there was some consternation with regards to what they did, what they were expected results they thought they might have, and then what they heard, they didn't apply for it, and some things came later. So as we move, I'm sure I'm sounding like a broken record. As we move forward into this next phase and whatever new things we need to do because they don't exist now, it might be worthwhile taking that one extra day and picking whoever you want to pick as a quote unquote guinea pig to say, try this out, let me know what you find out, and go forward from there. That's just a suggestion since I don't give directions or recommendations. The one other suggestion, Chairman, on your end, so it's great having this presentation. We've had them, the information over time, updates over the last 8 or 9 months. But at times it seemed a request would go in, and Director Wilmer, I know from our conversations, the trials and tribulations you'd have to go through to go collect all the information, it wasn't as easy as I would say, why aren't you just pushing a button for a report that you generated before and it just populates the cells that you expect to? Well, no, Senator, and XYZ. So I think in order for us to, since we're back in session now, in order for all of us to have, and the public as well, the ability to conduct oversight, surveillance, review what's being done, I think we're going to need the information on a regular basis. So, Chairman, I'd recommend we try and see how do we get this kind of information, whatever it is, updated on with some regularity, so that it's not a yeah. And I think that ties to, and I'll be quiet right after this. I think that ties to the challenges, and I'll put that nicely. Our IT systems, which we have in the state, allow us, and what they restrict us or don't permit us to do. So that's going to be something I think we need to look at long term from an IT perspective.
Yeah.
But thank you, Chairman.
No, I think it's a fair point, Senator, and thank you for bringing that up. I think a couple points in that. I think obviously as the programs continually change and the stimulus legislation passes, it's I have to imagine administratively difficult to set up everything in the accounting systems and manage that through. But I do think one of the things that as the legislature is back in session and we are going to continue meeting at this point, I think there is an opportunity here for us to continually be involved with the administration as we're going through this and pass legislation as needed, pass appropriations as needed, and make sure that we're consistently being updated on this information, taking a look at the new funds that are coming in, looking at our current revenue picture, and passing, quite frankly, as many supplementals as it may take as the data and information changes. And so I do think there definitely from the entire chamber and especially from this committee, I know our members want to be engaged, and they want to be part of the process, and do our constitutional appropriation responsibility. So I think us being engaged and participating here will drive more data and more updates coming, likely more frequently. And I know the administration will be happy to partner us and make sure that happens.
Yeah, absolutely, Chairman. I certainly appreciate your comments and Senator DePalma's. We put a lot of this information together by hand right now, unfortunately, because our accounting system is 20 plus years old, and wasn't designed to handle these sort of things. Many states have a grant management system that's tied closely with the federal government, to be able to do more of this reporting in real time. And unfortunately, we haven't yet invested in something like that in Rhode Island. And so a lot of has to be worked by hand. And some of that delays reporting, which is unfortunate, but it's just, and to be frank, it also increases risk of compliance problems, risk of forecasting problems and budgeting problems. Anytime you have to do routine exercise by humans, and can't rely on machines for the routine part, it's hard to keep things perfectly accurate. We've done a very, very good job, I think, so far, but it takes far too many people to keep this going, where people are in short supply right now for a lot of aspects of this crisis. But we look forward to continually partnering with the committee.
Great. Okay, Director, thank you so much for bringing us through sort of the spending and budget to date. I think we want to sort of change gears a little bit with a bit of an eye ahead towards at least what we know at this point about the federal aid that was passed in December. And so let me turn it over to you there to begin running us through.
Okay, happy to. There's quite a bit we know, and there's some to be excited about, but there's also a lot of guidance that hasn't shown up yet, and some of the numbers I'm going to show you are still estimates that have yet to be verified. So even some of the numbers aren't completely finalized, and a lot of these numbers have moved around as they've gone from estimates to actuals from the federal agencies. And I suppose there's even some possibilities of major shifts as the new administration takes over at the federal level, if an agency is asked to change directions. So, again, hundreds of millions of dollars, but they're really for specialized areas. The CRF extension happened, which is certainly helpful, but since we really spent it doesn't really help us that much. Maybe if they hadn't waited until like a week before the deadline, it would have been more useful to us. The unemployment extension is very, very helpful, not just for our revenues, but just really for not breaking the economy of Rhode Island and many other places, because that level of scarring can really disrupt an economy. The Paycheck Protection Program fully extended, and this is really the fifth bill, and the last couple have been relatively large, but quite a number of them have been coming through, and many of these have been very helpful, but they've been also a lot to untangle. If you are brave enough to look at the bill itself, it's tied up in Appropriations Act as well. So, there's tens of thousands of pages to go through, and there's only, 5,000 or 6,000 associated with the stimulus piece. So it's quite a bit to wade through. So as we mentioned Testing and vaccine gave us $70 million. We're relatively certain about the use of these because there's some specific vaccine and testing grants that we already have from the previous stimulus bill. And generally, they're very, very broad to help the areas of testing and contact tracing and vaccine. But as I mentioned before, it doesn't really offset our general revenue appropriation one for one, because mostly it's supplanting the FEMA money. We have quite a bit of money coming in the education area. The gear money is relatively flexible, which will be helpful to the state. And the assistance for private schools, we expect to be relatively not flexible and fairly directly administered. The piece we don't know a lot about yet is unfortunately the largest piece, $185 million for LEAs. And part of the reason we don't know its flexibility is the maintenance of effort requirement you'll see down here at the bottom. The federal government changed the maintenance of effort requirement to include the words proportional levels, but it's very, very unclear what the proportional levels refer to. And whether this is per student, per capita, whether it's per district, the state as a whole, and so we have some very, very hard choices to make coming up in the budget, and not a lot of clarity yet about how $185 million affects our K-12 spending. Uses aren't clarified yet in guidance either, although I'm personally expecting them to be a lot like the previous K-12 funds, which means we'd have some decent flexibility on uses, but allocation is still very much up in the air. In addition, higher ed got quite a bit of money, over $50 million in total. And you can see here the breakdown between what would go to the institution for institutional work and then what would go directly to the students through some sort of allocation. So a lot of this will be very, very helpful. In particular, Rhode Island College and CCRI have had to make some reductions this year to keep within budget that have been very, very difficult for them, and these funds will help a lot. It's not entirely clear what the uses will be and how flexible they will be to offset some of the budgetary problems, but given that that's generally seems to be the point of this money, I'm very hopeful that it will be able to mitigate their revenue and budget problems. But again, they have this strange maintenance of effort addition that we are still awaiting guidance from the federal government about what that really means and how it might impact our budgets. In addition, there's quite a few other areas. The child care grants have some corresponding grants in previous stimulus bills. More money for addiction and mental health, which is sorely needed based on the rates we're seeing right now. These are both estimates. We don't have firm numbers or any guidance yet from the federal government. We do have additionally $54 million for transportation. This could not come at a better time for us, as we have lots of other federal projects that are requiring match right now. We've had a little bit of a cash flow issue with maintaining everything. So this has really been will be very, very helpful to us in maintaining DOT's agenda for the remainder of the fiscal year. And then Director Smiley mentioned over 200 million for rental assistance. This is a huge amount of money for the state of Rhode Island, and it's going to really take some very, very focused effort to get this out the door, because there are some strict rules about how long it takes us to spend this money right now, and we certainly want to be able to maximize our use of that grant. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the overall briefing on the federal funds. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Director. Just a couple questions for me, and then I know a few of our members have questions as well. Specifically related to the DOT 54 million. If we think about the recent conversation we had and the decision that we had made around putting the $70-ish million bond on the ballot, it was around that state match that we needed for all the federal money and making sure that we had enough state match to fund both fiscal 21 and fiscal 22 matches that were required. Do we expect this additional $54 million? How do we expect that to interplay with the existing federal projects and then the amount that we needed for the state match? Are we just going to do 54 million in additional projects? Are we going to fund some of the projects out of this funding? Do we have that level of information yet?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a bit of a preview. Certainly DOT can give you more details. FY22 in particular had always a very, very large problem, and I want to say problem in a good way. Is we're being given a lot of good opportunities from the federal government right now to match funds that they're providing. And when you have somebody willing to pay 80% of your project, 70% of your project, it's worth a lot of time to figure out where we can come up with those funds, just because of if nothing else, the multiplier effect on the economy. But these funds will certainly help us get through the cash flow aspects of this year, and then the GO will really help us in the match, part of the match for FY22. Based on the estimations that we are doing right now with DOT, even after the GO is done, there's another 30 million or so that we should all consider fairly highly for FY22, and maybe a bit into 23 for match of projects that we have the opportunity to. Because while the DOT was given 54 million, there are some also other changes that require additional match from the state at the same time. That as the federal government giveth, the federal government taketh away.
Okay, that makes sense. Senator Acosta.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, could you go back to the K-12 or just the education slide? Actually, the K-12 one is the purple one. How much of these funds are in addition to what the federal government was going to give Rhode Island anyway? And somewhat related to this, the pandemic kind of laid bare how leaky our roofs were and how we have been under investing in our infrastructure for a long time. Is the administration working with the treasurer to expand the school construction deadline that we had, which was supposed to expire this year because districts might not have taken, or municipalities who were nervous about the pandemic didn't invest over the last year? Is there momentum for growing that? Can any of these funds be used to address some of these infrastructure shortcomings? I was thinking back to the earlier slide you showed us where the high density school districts, and if you mix that with the equipping to reopen, and we spent $29 million on Band-Aids pretty much. But is there any plan to invest seriously in our school building stock?
Well, that's a great question, and we don't know yet whether the 185 million could be used for school building infrastructure yet. It's certainly an intriguing idea and an intriguing possibility. Whether that can be done, we'll have to wait for the federal guidance to know for sure. We haven't gotten a lot of guidance from the Department of Education yet on that topic.
And then the administration and the relationship with the treasurer and any plans of extending the timeline for when municipalities can invest and get the reimbursement for school construction?
I am unaware of any extension or work that's been done on that. I can certainly check and see if the treasurer has any plans. Dr. Smiley, do you have any other information on that?
Not on the extension, although the school construction coordinator at the Department of Education, Christine Lopes-Metcalf, and the deputy director of DOA, Dan McConaughey, and Treasurer Magaziner do meet regularly to continue to promote and try to approve projects. And it's a good flag about the extension of the deadline. But there are projects happening, and there is still funding available, and the $500 million approved through the General Assembly and the voters. It's just a matter of getting the school districts to commit. And so it's a great point that you raised, Senator, and we'll be sure to talk to the treasurer about it.
Yeah. No, I agree, Director and Senator. I think it's definitely a topic that we should look into early on in this session and see what adjustments we may need to make to the program that we created. School construction's been a big priority for the Senate. We actually led on the issue with the task force that led to the program that's in place today. So we will definitely be sure to follow up on that. Okay. Senator DePalma, did I see you may have had a question?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, thank you. Just, I think 2 quick ones. Director, back to the, no need to change the page, back to the transportation dollars. Those dollars, if I read it correctly, are based on what you have here, these are not dollars that require match. These are dollars the state can use as they see fit. Can they use it for match to federal dollars? It's money's fungible, so it's hard to know where it's going. But
yeah, I think it can't be used for federal match, as I understand it, but it could offset other 100% state projects that then could be used for federal match. So basically, in a sense, given the size of the DOT budget and the number of projects underway, we can sort of make it act like it can be used for match as a result.
So I guess the question, unless just knowing about a little bit of the transportation projects we've looked at over the years, to say that it can't be used for the match basically says we have to show the federal government that we're using it somewhere else other than we're doing it for state-only projects that don't have a federal match, because otherwise the money's all fungible into the fund within which it goes, as opposed to this is 80% for something that, like we needed to do, we got to go find the state match to append to that, correct?
Yeah, look, I should check. I'm not 100% sure it can't be used for the federal match, but I know the effect of the money is that basically it's like we have $54 million of state revenue because at least we can work it through the DOT and offset other expenses.
And we definitely have many projects to do that in the roadwork program. Just to back to one other question, Chairman, and I think the last question I have. I got some conversation what we're doing over the years with DCYF and foster youth. Obviously, the previous the CARES money, the CRF dollars, et cetera, we were able to get some money to foster families during the pandemic last year while school was out, and all the challenges they had because of not being able to go to work, and you're taking care of foster children for the state, all those kinds of things you can imagine, and pull that trail as you go. I believe the budget that was passed, the omnibus bill, of which the stimulus money was a part of, the 9,000, 6,000 pages, whatever it was. I believe there was money in there to support foster youth. Based on what you have here, is any of that a part of that or no?
I don't think any of that is a part of the stimulus piece.
Okay.
But an appropriation bill often has changes that affect state programs that are federally funded. So that might be a piece. We could certainly check on that if you like.
If you could, because I think in there, part of the money was associated with Chafee dollars, and there was some increase in there, a significant amount of money for Chafee dollars and education and training. So it's it would be beneficial to Rhode Island, given the work we were trying to do with, I'll say foster youth, youth in transition, kids who are in the extension of care program, et cetera, to try and get them on their feet and break that cycle of poverty. So if we can check on that, that would be good. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I think, by the way, the other piece was the Title IV money, where I think moving up to age 22 instead of 21, which would help us as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Director, just looking at slide 40 in the appendix, there's an additional about 142 million there, I guess, that came in from federal money so far that's not included in the money we've talked about. Would it be possible to have these departments or agencies provide an update memo as to what they've spent that money on and to date and what their plans are for it in the future, unless there's another better mechanism that you can think of to get an update?
We can do that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that'd be great. Just want to make sure, some of these are relatively sizable, so I want to make sure that we're well aware of where that's going and what the plans are for it. Okay. Are there other questions from the committee? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Director Wilmer, Director Smiley, for joining us this evening. I think this is a very comprehensive update. I know we look forward to working with you as you begin to gather more information and understand more about the December stimulus that was passed, and as we get more finality to what those rules are going to be, understanding how that can help us and impact both the fiscal 21 and fiscal 22 budgets. As I mentioned before, I think we'll be working in close consultation with you here in the next few weeks and into the next few months on ensuring that we get that right, to make sure that we work with you on an updated supplemental to obviously maximize those funds. As I mentioned earlier, we'll do as many supplementals as we need to, given there's probably likely another stimulus package that's going to pass. But I know the legislature and I know the Senate is very eager to partner with you on that and make sure that we're performing our appropriations responsibility timely and quickly, which I think is an option that we have available to us, given that we are back in session and we are meeting. And so we look forward to doing that. And we also look forward to working with you on the fiscal 22 budget. I know from our own fiscal staff, they felt the fiscal 21 budget never ended, and it still hasn't ended. The supplemental, I think, will be significant, but the fiscal 22 budget will certainly be a challenging document for us to pull together, and we look forward to working with you on that as well.
Mr. Chairman, certainly look forward to working with you, and here's to the budget getting done at some point.
We appreciate that, and we look forward to it as well. So. All right. Thank you once again, everyone, and thank you to members of the committee for your time this evening. We appreciate it. And with that, a motion would be in order.
Motion to adjourn.
Senator Palmer moves to adjourn, second by Senator Acosta and Senator Felag. All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.